Public Nemesis Media.
Here's the experience of an average Macedonian on the internet. I'm gonna watch some YouTube videos about my people. Then I'll go on other websites and I'll also read lots of stuff about my nation. I'm so excited to see what people think about us. No such thing as a Macedonian nation. There's no such nation. There is not Macedonian nation. They were never Bulgarians but Serbs. Macedonians are Greeks. Don't be further ridiculous. Macedonian are only the Greeks. The residents are part of Macedonians are actually Bulgarian origin. You forgot the word North Macedonians. The real ones those are Serbs. Always these ones are confused Bulgarians. They are obviously Southern Serbs. Come on guys, wake up. There is no Macedonian language. There is just Macedonian language. Macedonian language is Bulgarian written on a Serbian typewriter. There is no Macedonian language. Bitola Vardarska. Macedonia is in Greece. This isn't Macedonian. It's just Bulgarian language as is Bulgarian Macedonia. Macedonians, a mix of Bulgarians and Albanians. The so-called Macedonian language is that a kind of a Macedonian language in the title Identity Crisis Bulgarian language. Commie invention. As a nation, completely fabricated and invented nation. Tito made a Macedonian identity in a majority Bulgarian region has always been a part of locals this new identity. Macedonian Bulgarians North Macedonia is all around they are brainwashed how too stupid to see people who refuse to pretend they are propaganda false if your country. And these Kurds are an original ethnic group and not rebranded. Macedonian nation and language only language and nationality in modern Macedonian nation is a creature of the Serbian. The so-called Macedonians have such a nation never previously become a separate national category. Macedonia should be divided.
Pa Makedonce propisao Tito. Kakva je to nacija? Nije nikakva nacija. Nemoj se šalimo.
Македонската нация не се е формирала по естествен път, както във всички нормални държави. Тя е умишлено създадена от Сърбия, за да може българите от Македония да забравят корените си и да станат част от Югославия.
There is one Macedonia and it's Greek. There is no possibility for a second Macedonia to exist.
Shut up! Everyone just shut the up!
I'm tired. I'm very tired. In the past year and a half, I've uploaded many videos, most of which centered around Macedonia and Macedonians. Every time I uploaded a new video of that kind, I'd get dozens of downright dehumanizing comments. This isn't a new phenomenon or something that's exclusive to my channel. Even before I started Public Nemesis Media, I noticed that it was acceptable to insult Macedonians without fear of repercussion. Someone could be talking about a Macedonian chicken farm, and it'd still get comments from people that complain about the very existence of the Macedonian nation. Going beyond YouTube, the situation is the same. Where do I even begin? Shall I start with the name calling, Fakedonians, Vardaskians, Skopjans, Makedonians, North Macedonians, as well as generic insults that sound like they were made by 4th graders? Do I begin with calling them a fake nation and their country fake, artificially created, invented by Tito, brainwashed Bulgarians, brainwashed Serbs, made up, etc.? Must I go into the territory of outright denialism, saying that Macedonians should stop calling themselves Macedonians, that the Macedonian nation doesn't exist, and openly calling for wiping out the Macedonian state from the face of the earth? The last point of denialism is especially of concern. This situation isn't just about trolls on the internet making awful comments, it's about the war against the Macedonian name and identity. There are publications out there that seriously say Macedonians should stop being named that, putting the term Macedonian nation and Macedonian language under quotes or after so-called, saying that neighboring countries should just eliminate Macedonia, and the fact that the Macedonian country changed its name to North Macedonia and people were still complaining because the word Macedonia remained truly showcases how serious the situation is. It got to the point where the very existence of the Macedonian nation, state and language makes people upset. Those people justify their anti-Macedonian bigotry by claiming that their existence is a mistake, that they didn't have an organic formation like other nations, but were invented out of thin air, and how the Macedonian identity was forced onto Macedonians for geopolitical reasons. All those claims are untrue, tiresome, dangerous, and dehumanizing. It's necessary to debunk them in order to make a case on why Macedonians have full right to the Macedonian name. Now, before some of you jump on me with comments like, "But you made tons of videos against Macedonia's historical falsifications," I'm clarifying right now that I stand by my videos and I'm still against those falsifications. However, being against rewriting history is nowhere near close to being against the nation as a whole. Historical truths are not the enemies of Macedonians. On the contrary, showing and acknowledging them will show the existence of the Macedonian nation in a positive light. If you have seen my earlier videos, you'll most likely recognize the historical truths, as many of the things you'll hear in this video were already said on this channel. One of those things is identifying as a Macedonian in the past. The opponents of the Macedonian nation say that no one identified as Macedonian before the 1940s, except a handful of exceptions. Yet evidence points out that people identified as Macedonians all the way back during the Ottoman rule. Take any revolutionary from that time and you can find terms like the Macedonian people. Take a look at linguists and you can find the term Macedonian used for both the people and their dialect. Check out their ideology and you will see that it all revolves around Macedonia. But that's a regional identity, I hear you shout. You're right. And it was very powerful. I never denied the Bulgarian ethnic conscience of those revolutionaries and linguists. I just believe it's odd how a lot of people think that ethnic conscience somehow negates the Macedonian character of those historical figures. Obviously, the Macedonian identity came from the connection to the region of Macedonia, but the opponents of the Macedonian nation dismiss or even deny its strength. The love for Macedonia was seen in the foundation of the organization that wanted its freedom, which had many names, but we'll just call it IMRO in order to make things simple. Its members adopted the slogan "Macedonia for the Macedonians," which meant that people should think of themselves as Macedonians first and that Macedonia belongs to them. Also, while some did wish for a Bulgarian Macedonia or for unification with Bulgaria, the primary idea for solving the Macedonian question was autonomy for Macedonia. In other words, Macedonia should be its own thing. Their struggles to achieve the goals was what made the Macedonians first and then everything else. Such cases of people identifying that way were seen in the manifesto of the headquarters of the Macedonian army by the National Assembly of Macedonia, where its authors wrote that they were first and foremost Macedonians. Then there were revolutionaries like Jan Sandanski, who had statements how Macedonia shall be freed from its inhabitants, who should all feel as Macedonians rather than whatever their ethnicity was. And then there were written testimonials like the one in Macedonia Under Slavery, where its author, Pavel Shatev, wrote that he met people in a Turkish prison who were ethnic Bulgarians, but foremost felt like Macedonians, adopted the slogan "Macedonia for the Macedonians," and claimed that Macedonia was one thing, while Bulgaria was the other. It's not uncommon to meet people today who have ancestors from Macedonia that view themselves as Macedonians first and then as Bulgarians. Another huge aspect of the Macedonian identification is how nearly specific it is to the Bulgarians from Macedonia. I say nearly because the idea for Macedonia's autonomy was also accepted by Vlachs and a few Macedonian Jews, but that's pretty much about it. IMRO offered cooperation with large ethnic groups that lived in Macedonia to achieve freedom, but they refused. Here's what a well-known IMRO revolutionary, Dimo Hadjdimov, wrote on the idea of Macedonian autonomy. This idea, however, remained only a Bulgarian idea. Neither the Greeks, nor the Turks, nor any other nationality in Macedonia adopted the slogan. One more thing, they declared themselves against it, against the autonomous idea. As I already mentioned, it was a struggle for Macedonians' liberation that made them Macedonians, and that identity overpowered every other identification they had. That is why you can see Bulgarians and Vlachs from Macedonia viewing themselves as Macedonians, which wasn't seen among other ethnic groups that lived in that region. Don't take my word for it, check out what the Bulgarian ethnographer Vasil Kuntrov had to say in one of his works. The local Bulgarians and Vlachs who live in the region of Macedonia call themselves Macedonians, and the surrounding nations also call them that. Turks and Albanians from Macedonia do not call themselves Macedonians, but when asked where they are from, they respond, "From Macedonia." Albanians from the north and northwest limits of the area, who also call their country Arnavutluk, and Greeks who live in the southern areas, do not call themselves Macedonians. Hence the borders of these areas, according to people's perception, are not clearly defined. All this evidence points out that the Macedonian identity is not artificially created in 1944 like a lot of misguided people say. If Imre was successful during Ottoman times and managed to create a Macedonian state, we would still have a separate Macedonian nation consisting out of the same ethnic groups like the Macedonian nation in our timeline. And I'm not the only one who believes that. We can debate on whether that nation would be the same as the one in our current world, but my main point is that there was an organic, ethnogenic process that was happening back during the Ottoman rule, proving that the Macedonian nation was not forcefully invented by someone from the outside. To be fair, the opponents of the Macedonian nation are somewhat correct when they said that outside factors played their role in the formation of that nation. Matter of fact, it was documented in an 1888 letter written by a well-known linguist from Macedonia, Kuzman Shapkarev, which he sent to a fellow linguist by the name Marindrinov. In that letter, Shapkarev wrote that the term Macedonian wasn't firstly adopted by the intelligentsia there, but was put on them 10 to 15 years ago by, get this, the Greeks. What an irony. The ones who are the most vocal against who they call Skopjans or Vardaskians, using Macedonian for themselves, are the first one to call them Macedonians. I do believe in Shapkarev's words because A. Some other inhabitants of Macedonia, like Petko Slavekov, called out the people who identified as just Macedonian for being brainwashed by Greek propaganda back in 1871, and B. There were some Greeks that wrote in their memoirs about how they put that Macedonian label onto the Macedonian-Bulgarian population. For example, you had a man named Athanasios Suliotis who created a brochure named The Prophecy of Alexander the Great. As he wrote in his memoirs, it was in the Slavo-Macedonian language and was used to spread the prophecies said by Alexander the Great among the Slavic population of Macedonia. Another example is a man named Germanos Karavangelis, who in his memoirs wrote about a situation where he tried to convince a Slav from Macedonia that he was a descendant of Alexander the Great and should, quote-unquote, return to his Greek roots. Yes, this was all propaganda meant to Hellenize the Slavs. They were descendants of the ancient Macedonians, who were Greeks, therefore they are Greeks and should join the Greek state. However, when you combine that whole agenda with some previous things I said, you have a series of uncomfortable truths, those being that the Greeks did not fight for a Macedonian state, they did not call themselves Macedonians, yet they called Skopjans Macedonians. In fact, they were the first ones to do that. They tried to convince modern Macedonians that they descended from the ancient Macedonians, and they called their language Slavo-Macedonian. But no, Macedonians should just drop their national name because apparently Greece owns the copyright to that name. Anyways, back to Shapkarev's letter, it was written that the second group of people that began calling them Macedonians were Bulgarians. I'm referring to the Bulgarians from Bulgaria, not from Macedonia. Kuzma Shapkarev went as far as to write how those Bulgarians denied their Bulgarian name by calling them not Macedonian Bulgarians, but simply Macedonians. Once again, I do believe what Shapkarov wrote, because there are old documents like Bulgarian newspapers that refer to the Bulgarians of Macedonia as simply Macedonians. Naturally, Bulgaria viewed Macedonians as ethnic Bulgarians, but even back then both were aware that there were differences between them. Perhaps the earliest case that shows such differences was the language dispute. What I mean by language dispute is the number of issues about the standardization of the Bulgarian language, which was standardized based on the northeastern dialects. Since the Macedonian dialects were obviously Western dialects, they were neglected, and so even back then you could see the terms like Macedonians and Macedonian language being used to express the unique local characteristics. The language division was followed with a territorial and soon after a political division. Now, the conflict between Macedonians and the Bulgarian government is a long and complicated story. The main problem Macedonians had was how their regional characteristics were suppressed. Not only were their dialects not considered for the standardization, but even using them, as was seen in a Macedonian magazine published in Sofia called Loza, as something that the Bulgarian government forbade. It viewed any care of unique Macedonian stuff as separatism that tore the Bulgarian nation. Even before Loza, there were Bulgarian accusations of separatism among Macedonians, which were thrown alongside some very not nice words about the Macedonian people. The centralization of power and opposition to regional uniqueness were criticized by some of the biggest Macedonian heroes. One of the founders of IMRO, Petar Poparsov, wrote an entire book criticizing Bulgaria's government. Another founder of IMRO, Anton Dimitrov, supported Poparsov and spoke well on his book. Yet another founder of IMRO, Ivan Hadjinikolov, wrote in his memoirs that the teachers from Bulgaria who came to Macedonia belittled them, saying that they were weak patriots, and how the already mentioned Vasil Kuntrov proclaimed loudly that he came to Macedonia to Bulgarize it. Hadjinikolov had to explain that they were already Bulgarians and big patriots, and according to his words, Kuntrov was offended he stood up to him and hated him since that day. On the other side, Pavel Shatov criticized some of his fellow revolutionaries, who he labeled as terrorists, because their violent activities and assassinations made the Macedonians look like simpletons and murderers. Indeed, both sides had their fault in the distance between them that grew more and more. Such distancing did have its role in the Macedonian ethnogenesis, just like the local unique characteristics present in the region. One group of people that was aware of Macedonia's uniqueness and tried to strengthen it was the Serbs, another player in the Macedonian question. The Serbian agenda was to emphasize that uniqueness so the Macedonians could move away from Bulgaria and the Bulgarian identity, after which they would be Serbized. The disingenuous support for the local Macedonian identity was seen when a primer in the Macedonian language was created by the Serbian politician Stojan Novaković and then sent to Macedonia. It was also seen when the Serb geographer Jovan Cvijić made multiple maps with Macedonian Slavs on them and claimed that the Slavs of Macedonia were not Serbs or Bulgarians, but an amorphous mass. Sure, it was essentially propaganda created in order to justify Serbia's expansion to Macedonia's territory, but it showed that the specific Macedonian traits existed and that at some point the Serbs did support those traits and the Macedonian identity in general. One thing people like Novaković and Cvijić got wrong was that the Macedonian identity could not be maintained and could be Serbized easily, a claim that was proved wrong during the Serb occupation of Vardar Macedonia. Before we get to that part, I have to address how outside propagandas only made the Macedonian identity stronger. It was clear already by the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century that there were preparations by Balkan countries to go to war with the Ottoman Turks and take the rest of the Balkan lands. That posed a threat to Macedonia's population, considering that so many countries wanted Macedonia for themselves and would fight anyone for it. Because of the possibility for a catastrophe in the dividing of Ottoman-controlled territories, one man came up with a solution which he wrote in his infamous book. The man in question was Krste Misirkov, and his book was named On Macedonian Matters. Many people dismissed that book as something made accidentally, and Misirkov as some sort of lunatic. I don't think they even bothered to actually read his book. Now, Misirkov makes multiple points in his book, but the most important one can be seen in the following passage. It should be clear to us that the autonomy of Macedonia, for which the revolutionaries fought until now, makes sense only if our people are separated from the other Balkan nations. Only the separate Macedonian national self-awareness gives us the moral right to fight against the desire of the small Balkan states to divide our homeland. If we give in to the propaganda, they will succeed in their ultimate goal, the division of our homeland. As you just heard, a Macedonian national conscience is not only the core of the Macedonian state, but it's also a weapon against any influence or threat from the outside. Misirkov knew that only a separate Macedonian state can bring peace, hence why he advocated for a unique conscience that will work towards that state rather than some other Balkan country. I also have to respond to two problems people have when it comes to the ideas in On Macedonian Matters. The first one goes like this. If the term Macedonians during that time meant all the inhabitants, then why should the Macedonian nation be made solely out of its Slavic population? Remember how the vast majority of ethnic groups living in that region didn't fight for its autonomy or call themselves Macedonians? It's pretty pointless to impose such identity on people who don't feel any connection to that piece of land. The second problem people have is, why are people like Misirkov and me allegedly trying to divide the Bulgarian people? Misirkov wrote that individuals like him are not separating from Bulgaria because we already have been separate for 25 years at that point. Others divided us, some don't want to see us unite, and that period of separation created different living conditions. Another reason why being Macedonian over Bulgarian, that is, if we must choose between them, is the different approach to the Macedonian question. Krste Misirkov not only mentioned that in On Macedonian Matters, but also in numerous articles he wrote in the 1920s. He acknowledged that his Macedonian patriotism defeated his Bulgarian patriotism, and that his radical pro-Macedonian views may be a bit extreme for the Bulgarian public, like his call for Aegean Macedonians to move to Vardar Macedonia instead of Bulgaria so they could prepare their return. A Bulgarian can't think like that. Yes, but a Macedonian can and should, our author wrote. Overall, the Macedonian Slavic conscience that Misirkov advocates is a tool for Macedonia's freedom and against outside hostile forces. The Slavs in Macedonia shouldn't feel first and foremost as Serbs or Bulgarians, but as Macedonians, an identity that clearly showed the case for Macedonia and putting the interests of that region over all other interests. To quote Krste Misirkov one more time, Bulgaria can conclude an agreement with Serbia on the separation of spheres of influence in Macedonia. Such a division of spheres of influence will inevitably lead to the division of Macedonia. That is why one of the main duties of the Macedonian intelligentsia is to remove once and for all the Bulgarian and Serbian propaganda from Macedonia, to establish in Macedonia its own spiritual center for the Macedonians, and that center, like the Macedonians themselves, should not have any give and take with the neighboring Balkan states and peoples. Surprise, surprise, his predictions happened exactly as he described them, but not many people listened to his warnings. Neighboring countries snatched Macedonian soil, they made deals to do that, and then they started fighting in Macedonia because of the dissatisfaction on how they divided it. 3 wars in a span of just 6 years, massive destruction, many killings and ethnic cleansing later, you had a liberated Macedonia, just in multiple parts. One Aegean Macedonia, with a Slavic population, was eliminated almost completely. Vardar Macedonia, where the Slavs were forcibly converted into Serbs, and Pirin Macedonia, which didn't feel like Bulgarian land despite being annexed into the Bulgarian state. During this tragic time, you could see ethnic separatism proclaimed as a response to the tearing of Macedonian land. Already after the First Balkan War, there was a newspaper called Makedonski Golos, which the front center of the first issue had a quote that they were a separate Macedonian people and that Macedonia belonged only to them. Then in 1917, a Bulgarian politician born in Macedonia, Dimitar Blagoev, strongly criticized the wars in the Bulgarian parliament. One thing which stood out in that speech was him saying, "I was born in Zagoricane, but I'm not a Bulgarian. I'm a Macedonian Slav, and as such, if you want to know, I'm for Macedonia as a Slavic land that will have its own government." Let's also not forget how the division of Macedonia, claiming of its land under justification that its population was Bulgarian or Serbian or Slavophone Greek, and the oppression that followed the division led the Macedonians to declare that they are a separate nation and that their homeland belongs only to them. Those are some of the consequences of the liberation. So Aegean Macedonia was left with most of its Slavic population exiled. What about Vardar Macedonia, where most of the exiled was the intelligentsia? You were forced to speak Serbian, your family name was altered to end with ich, and the best land there was given to colonists who came from other parts of Yugoslavia. Yet Macedonians are supposed to feel thankful because Serbia freed them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Serbia
Has freed us.
Oh, I wouldn't say free. More like under new management.
As for the claim that all Macedonians are Serbs, I'll address it in a simple manner. Even small children can understand it, because I believe any super deep analysis would be unnecessary. So before 1878 you had no interest in Macedonia. Yes. Only after you had nowhere to expand your territory did you consider expanding to my land. Yes. And when you sent your agents to Macedonia, I created anti-Serb organizations and assassinated those agents. Yes. And when you conquered Vardar Macedonia, I uprose against you. Yes. And then uprose again. Yes. And then in World War I, I fought on the Bulgarian side against you. Yes. And when you got Vardar Macedonia back, I killed members of your occupational forces. Yes. And I even killed your king. Yes. So the entire time you wanted to, or actually controlled Vardar Macedonia, I fought against you. Makes sense to me. So Macedonians are not Serbs. Macedonians are Serbs. Do I even need to say anything more? Well, actually I do, because there's another myth in connection to the Serbian role in the Macedonian ethnogenesis. The myth that Serbs magically and single-handedly invented the Macedonian nation in 1945. Remember the Serbian politicians from the 19th century who wanted to make the population of Macedonia an amorphous mass, or how they called it, Macedonian Slavs? Well, it's being presented as some sort of undeniable proof that Macedonians exist because of Serbian brainwashing. I wish I was joking. However, this was unironically claimed in many books, articles, by many well-known historians, and in documentaries.
Колкото и да ни е неприятно, днес трябва да признаем, че македонска нация има.
Македонската нация не се е формирала по естествен път, както във всички нормални държави. Тя е умишлено създадена от Сърбия, за да може българите от Македония да забравят корените си и да станат част от Югославия. След Втората световна война са положени титанични усилия да бъде създадена нова нация, с нов език и ново самосъзнание.
You've gotta be kidding me.
That's right. You're not a normal nation. Your country isn't normal. You had no natural and organic ethnogenesis. Your entire existence is just a plot by some evil mastermind. Now put that in your history books. Frankly, it baffles me how many people seriously believe that Macedonians were invented out of thin air by the Serbs, considering how freaking easy it is to debunk that claim. Those Serb propagandists said themselves that their propaganda gave no results. Any Macedonization was completely dropped by Serbia when it got Vardar Macedonia in 1912, and no, it wasn't a plan B if Serbization failed, because Serbization did work and could simply be continued after World War II. Wait, there's more. The main problem about the thesis is that it cannot exist without a continuity, or at least a connection, between Serbian propaganda and the Comintern plus the Yugoslav Communist Party. You can read in some places how the Comintern and Yugoslav Communists took the ideas from Cvic and Novakovic, but you'll never read a single piece of evidence to back that claim. Probably because there is no evidence, no continuity, no connection, no truth to support such claim. And for the love of God, please learn the difference between Serbia and Yugoslavia. No, they are not the same thing, especially the Socialist Federation ruled by Josip Broz Tito. This man did not allow 40,000 Serb colonists to return to Macedonia. He left over 2 million Serbs outside the Serbian federal unit. He created 2 autonomous provinces within that unit, recognized a separate Montenegrin and a separate Muslim nation, wanted to give Western outlands back to Bulgaria, and he moved entire factories from Serbia to other Yugoslav states. Yet I'm told that he was a greater Serbian hegemonist, and that the Yugoslav Communist Party and Socialist Yugoslavia was controlled by Serbs and their puppets. There are a couple of more problems with the claim that the Serbs created the Macedonian nation. I dare to say there are even bigger problems than the historical inaccuracies. The first one is that it completely dehumanizes Macedonians, painting them as brain-dead NPCs who are very easy to manipulate and brainwash.
Ами сега като ние тук говориме за тях като за някакви, на които в чашата някакъв сърбин им слага нещо в напитката и те изведнъж стават някакви сърбомани, както ги наричат, че Белград ги контролира. Като се казва, че там Сърбия ги прави такива, каквито са, това се прави дехуманизация на този народ. Разбирате?
The second major problem is that it negates and insults the Macedonian struggle during the interwar period. One example of how the Macedonian identity fought against Serbization that I keep coming back to when I talk about this stuff was when a Belgrade University professor, Nikola Vulic, held a lecture on Macedonia in the Serbian Cultural Club, which was soon published as an article in the newspaper Vreme on November 16, 1936. The point of Vulic's lecture was that Macedonia existed only in the ancient times, hence why there's only South Serbia now and no Macedonia, and there surely is no Macedonian nation or a Macedonian language. After the article was published, the Serb professor went to Zagreb to hold another lecture, only to be met with a lot of Macedonian students and their fury. They resented him. Some even threw eggs. So Vulic left the premises of the Zagreb University earlier than planned. When he got out, he was met by Kočoracin, a famous Macedonian poet, and his group, who asked Vulic for a debate. Professor Vulic agreed, under condition that his colleague, Professor Jovan Radonic, participates in that debate as well. Razin and his friends would then strongly claim that the Macedonian nation and language do exist in the debate against the deniers. Coupled with more angry protests from Macedonians, eventually, the Serbs had to admit that Macedonia did exist. If you listen to the previously mentioned thesis, you would be fooled to think that the Serbs tried to convince Macedonians they were Macedonians, yet all the evidence points out it was the exact opposite. Further examination of the Macedonian activity during the interwar period can clearly show that the formation of the Macedonian nation was mainly carried by Macedonians themselves. There was some support for that formation that came from the outside, like from the Bulgarian Communist Party. However, it was primarily Macedonians themselves that have done everything to have all the characteristics that one nation should have. Territory. IMRA was re-established after World War I, and every one of its members, regardless of their place on the political spectrum, accepted the goal of an unified and independent Macedonia. Language. They released books with songs in Macedonian. They founded organizations dedicated to Macedonian literature and were the loudest to say that the Macedonian South Slavic dialect is a unique Slavic language. The feeling that you belong to a specific group of people. If unique regional characteristics, people being Macedonians first and foremost since the Ottoman rule, and the power of the Macedonian regional identity weren't enough to convince you, then check out the ethnogenesis during the interwar period. You have articles that talked about people identifying as simply Macedonian even when they visited Bulgaria. You have writings that pointed out how the younger generations were especially identifying as such, signifying the direction Macedonian people took. People in Bulgaria admitted that there was a Macedonian conscience different from the Bulgarian one. You had the 1936 court case against IMRA United, where most of its members said they were Macedonians by nationality. You can see the Macedonian historiography starting to be developed, both the separated from Bulgarians version and the we were always separate version. And to top it all off, the Comintern Resolution, the first document from a large organization that officially recognized the Macedonian nation, was actually a Macedonian creation. It wasn't an idea by Stalin or someone from the USSR or the members of the Yugoslav Communist Party. Macedonians said themselves that they were the first ones to ask if they were a separate nation. They were the ones that have explained the need for recognition to the Comintern. They created the resolution itself, and even their opponents wrote that they are behind the idea that there is a separate Macedonian nation. All of this disproves that the Macedonians were invented, brainwashed, fabricated, fake, easy to manipulate, stupid, artificial, whatever insulting label people place on them. Now, the biggest skeptics may think, alright Phil, you are throwing all these arguments and evidence at us, but you're not mentioning how most of the separatism comes from the left wing. Federalists, Socialists, IMRA United, Bulgarian Communists of Macedonian origin. You're just picking the side that you like. It's fine if you think that. I, in all honesty, understand why you would view things that way. So we'll turn the coin on its other side and take a look at right-wing separatism.
От колко години живеете тук? Отдолу ли? Отдолу. Колко има бивши?
Yep. Ivan Mikhailov and his allies were Macedonian separatists. Before you jump on me with quotes of Mikhailov and Mikhailovists where they say there's no Macedonian nation, we're Bulgarians, you have to realize that their separatism wasn't as extreme as the left-wing one, but it was there and stronger than a lot of people think. Their ideology was not really different from the one among great revolutionaries from the late 19th century. Despite their Bulgarian ethnic conscience, they never advocated for a greater Bulgaria, but for an independent Macedonia, a Macedonia for the Macedonians. If you take a look at the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, its members advocated for a united independent Macedonia, were against the Bulgarian government, and viewed themselves first and foremost as Macedonians. Sure, they viewed it as a regional identity, but it was more powerful than any other identity, and if you paid attention, you already know such cases of regional identity overpowering all others was around even before the foundation of MPO. Ivan Mikhailov even wrote an entire book about what an independent Macedonia would look like. The book was named Macedonia, the Switzerland of the Balkans, and it advocated pretty much the same thing as progressive revolutionaries like Goce Delchev and Janez Antansky, which was a country that belonged to its inhabitants all of whom must feel as Macedonians. Another factor in Mihailov's separatism was his conflict with the Bulgarian state. I must clarify once again that the conflict between Bulgarians and Macedonians is a very long and complicated story. The Bulgarians were angry that they went through multiple national catastrophes, mostly because of Macedonia, that after 1918 they had to deal with many immigrants flooding from that region, and that later some of them, like the Mikhailovists, caused chaos every once in a while and killed some Bulgarian politicians. On the other side, the Macedonians were angry at Bulgaria for making a deal to divide their homeland, then fighting 2 more wars to annex the entire Macedonian region, but failing to do so. Many Macedonians were bitter and used those events as an argument to completely distance themselves from Bulgaria. However, in the case of the Mikhailovist wing of IMRO, the bitterness went much deeper. I don't think there is a better picture for what was going on around Pirin, Macedonia, in between IMRO and the Bulgaria than the one shown in the works of Ivan Mikhailov. Firstly, Pirin, Macedonia didn't even feel like it was a part of Bulgaria. The Bulgarian government had no control or influence over that part of Macedonia. It was ruled over by the Mikhailov-led IMRO, earning the title country within a country. This disconnection between Pirin, Macedonia and the rest of Bulgaria was confirmed by Mikhailov himself. In 1936, he published an article titled Hate Towards the Name Macedonia, where he accused the Bulgarian politicians of anti-Macedonian feelings, being against the usage of the very term Macedonia and cussing the Macedonian mother worse than the Serbs. Then a year later he published a brochure named Ko Vadis Bulgaria. It's a bit long, so I'll give the highlights. Macedonian Bulgarians are treated as third category citizens. Pirin, Macedonia is treated as a foreign territory. There is violence towards the Macedonian liberating movement. Bulgaria has imprisoned Macedonians as many as Yugoslavia and Greece. Discrimination of Macedonians. Singing Macedonian songs was forbidden. Being punished for wearing a red-black ribbon. Some officers saying, "You are Macedonians, not Bulgarians." Macedonians being viewed as foreigners, and a long list of Macedonians that were violently mistreated by the police. Afterwards, we have his letter sent to Minister Vasil Mitakov in May of 1941, when Yugoslavia fell and the Bulgaria got some parts of Macedonia. You'd think Ivan Mikhailov would have been happy that a good chunk of Macedonia was under Bulgarian administration, but nope. He once again came with harsh criticism towards the Bulgarian government for de-Bulgarizing Macedonia, hating them, repressing their liberation movement, cussing their Macedonian mother, etc. Aside from the opposition to the Bulgarian state, another big reason why Mikhailov wanted an independent Macedonia was because he knew that only such country will bring peace. He wrote numerous articles where he advocated for an independent Macedonian state, yet also wrote that the Macedonian question and liberation movement should be their own thing, rather than subjects of the Bulgarian state. Mikhailov then spoke negatively about Verkhovism, an ideology of the once active Supreme Committee which viewed the solution as annexing Macedonia into Bulgaria. On February 12, 1933, Ivan Mikhailov and his allies organized the Great Macedonian Assembly in Gorna Jumaya. It had around 20,000 people, all part of the Mikhailovist wing, like the MPO. On that day, they all proclaimed that their main goal was a united and independent Macedonia. There were rumors in the Bulgarian media that the Mikhailovists will declare Pirin, Macedonia as an independent state, which even got some support. You know what? I'm just gonna let Ljubčo Georgievski do this one for me.
Недела дена пред тоа, бугарските медиуми пишуваат дека Ванчо Михайлов, пази, тамо е негова војската, тамо е ВМРО, таа ситуација ја контролира ВМРО. Вели Ванчо Михајлов и го собира тој собир голем и вика најверојатно Пиринска Македонија ќе ја подражи, ќе ја прогласи за независна држава. Тоа се документи, тие ги има. Повеќе од половината на бугарската јавност вели дајте им нека ја прогласат Пиринска Македонија за независна држава, да ни се мавнат од вратот, доста ги трпивме тие, ги викале тогаш македонствијушчи.
While such declaration of independence did not happen, it didn't mean that Mikhailovists did not have it in their thoughts, at least as a part of a bigger plan. When Bulgaria and Greece fell in 1941 after an Axis invasion, the Mikhailovists immediately came out with the plan to finally create that independent state every Macedonian wanted. To be fair, it is debatable if Bulgaria could have created that state, considering that they only administrated some parts of Macedonia. The some parts is important here because you had a good chunk of territory taken over by Albania. Mikhailov even wanted to declare independence in 1944, but it was too late by then. Still, all of this proves that even if the Mikhailovist vision of Macedonia won, we would still have a Macedonian state today with Macedonian people. We can debate whether that Macedonian nation would have been like the one we have today, but considering there's proof that they had plans for Macedonian history and writing in the Macedonian dialect in their schools, as well as their weird position that they were a mixture of the ancient Macedonians and the Bulgarian Slavs. Yes, really. It's like being a Atichkiot and a Bugaroman at the same time. There's no reason to disbelieve that we would still have a separate Macedonian nation today, with its own state, its own dialect, its own history, etc. Regardless what you think of Ivan Mikhailov and his allies, he was very correct on at least one thing. That one being that the only way to achieve peace in the Balkans is through Macedonia's independence and self-determination. As the cherry on top, here's a CIA document about Mikhailovists. The document stated that the Mikhailovists sent a congratulatory telegram to Tito when he recognized the Macedonian state within Yugoslavia, and only after the Tito-Stalin split have the Mikhailovists turn against him. Have you noticed that I barely talked about Tito in this video? Do you now realize the nonsense surrounding the whole Tito invented Macedonians claim? When even the people with a Bulgarian ethnic conscience fully engage in national separatism, it becomes clear as day that history has moved in the direction of a Macedonian nation and country, and those are not optional but necessary. Say what you want about the modern-day Republic of North Macedonia, about some of its politics and historiography. There are problems, but not as problems like back then. Dividing and fighting over Macedonia, then controlling a part of it, did not bring anything good for the people of the Balkans. If Macedonians were allowed to have a state of their own, then there would be no wars and destruction in their lands, no massive refugee waves, no fighting for more territory, no exploitation and oppression. The economy would have been better. There would have been no extreme forms of separatism, no falsifying history. So many problems would have been avoided both then and now if Macedonians were just left alone. Combine that with all the evidence for the Macedonian identity since the Ottoman times and the evolution of that identity that only made it stronger, and the narratives how that identity is fake, invented, that they don't have a right to call themselves Macedonians, all those narratives become laughable. Not only is the existence of the Macedonian nation legitimate and backed with a natural organic process like every other nation, that existence was not a mistake, but a solution for many Balkan problems, something that can bring everlasting peace both to that nation and the surrounding nations. That is why I made this video, to defend the Macedonian nation and to show its legitimacy and the many positives of its existence. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate that you took the time to hear what I had to say. God bless and goodbye.